For those of you who don't know, Commonwealth Writers is the cultural initiative from the Commonwealth Foundation. We develop the craft of writers in various disciplines, filmmaking, prose, fiction, and a variety of others. And we also build communities of those writers, artists, and dramatists who want to use their work for social change. We've been doing a series of conversations, as they're called, Commonwealth Writers' Conversations, around the Commonwealth over the last few months, including Bangladesh, Kenya, Colombia, so not just the Commonwealth. In fact, we're going to do one in Glasgow on Friday, just to come back to the UK for a bit. They all address a theme, a local theme, suggested by wherever we are, and usually or often a taboo or an untold story, something that really needs talking about in that particular region. So there's an urgency about them. And this particular conversation is very urgent. The facts are that 43 out of 53 Commonwealth countries criminalise homosexuality. That's 90% of Commonwealth citizens, 90. Those are the facts. The Czech-British playwright Tom Stoppard said that if you... I'm going to have to read this because I can't remember what he said now, which is very good. Oh, that's right, yeah. Words can build bridges across incomprehension and chaos, but we all know that. And they deserve respect. And if you can get the right ones in the right order, you might nudge the world a little. And we've got 3 people here tonight who are trying to nudge the world a little. 2 through words, Thomas Glave and Shyam Selvadore from Sri Lanka and Canada and Jamaica and America, respectively, or unrespectively. And Razia will introduce the panel in more detail, but also not only through words, through visual art as well. Sky Chirape, who has co-curated an exhibition which opens at the Shonibare Gallery in East London today, featuring work by women from across southern Africa. So, how the evening is going to go is we're going to have the conversation. Afterwards, I hope you will go outside and invest in a book, and also to look at Sky's, some of the art Sky's brought with her, and then join us for a drink to continue the discussion, which would not have been possible without the kind generosity of the Canadian High Commission, who provided the wine for this evening. So thank you to them. So over to Razia.
Thank you very much. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to extend my very, very warm welcome. I'm delighted to see so many people here. My name is Razia Iqbal. I work for the BBC. We are here this evening to celebrate the work, creative output of 3 remarkable artists, the writers Shyam Selvadore, Thomas Glave, and the visual artist Sky Chirape. And as Lucy said, you'll have seen some of Sky's work as you came into this incredibly intimidating on one level, but magnificent building. And we are also here to launch these 2 books, which I hope that you will invest in. Thomas Glave's Among the Blood People and Shyam's The Hungry Ghosts. I want to say, I'd urge you to buy these books, and I don't often say this. I do a lot of literary events. These are 2 very different books on all sorts of levels. Shyam's is a novel, and Thomas's is a book of essays. But the reason why I urge you to invest in the books is because they are not only powerful and beautifully written, but they are incredibly courageous books. And I think courage it's a quality that we underestimate at our peril, particularly in the context of what we're going to talk about today. So I very much hope that you will, in as much as my word means anything at all, that you will trust it and invest in these books. We're going to hear both Thomas and Shyam read from the books, and then we're going to talk about the following. The title of this conversation is Choices and Compromises, Heard and Silenced at Home, or Less Heard and Labelled Away. And by away, of course, we mean abroad. Both writers have grown up in Commonwealth countries and moved to, in Shyam's case, still a Commonwealth country, but in Thomas's case, to America. And we're going to try and have this conversation through the prism of two things, creativity and identity. So we're here to discuss the rights of lesbian, gay, bisexual and transgender people across the Commonwealth. I want to start, so that's the end of me rabbiting on. I'm going to start by inviting, and actually we didn't talk about who was going to go first. Who wants to go first?
You can go first.
Thanks, Shyam.
I understood alphabetically. So
Thomas Glave, I would like to invite you to read a little bit from your book of essays. In this book of essays, Thomas grapples with many, many issues. A lot of them are to do, all of them are to do with what it means to be Jamaican, what it means to be a man, what it means to be gay, what it means to have relationships with the country that he loves, but a country that doesn't love him as much as he loves it. Thomas.
Right, Razia, thank you very much. And I want to say thanks to everyone for supporting this event tonight and for being so welcoming to all of us here at the Commonwealth Foundation, including the organizers and my fellow panelists as well. I'm going to read from a piece in the book titled Toward a Queer Prayer. Today, or on another day, perhaps not so different from this one, a day of light and birds and even laughter, another faggot in Jamaica will perhaps scream as someone moves to burn down his home with him inside it, or tries to rip open his bowels with a machete as he, that faggot, is perhaps momentarily distracted by looking at the sea, at our gorgeous blue-green Caribbean Sea. He, the faggot, pondering waves there, pondering color and light and birds, and for possibly more than this moment, not dwelling, no, not at all, on how much his body and his flesh and his very breath are all still so hated in Jamaica. For this moment, as he ponders that beckoning water into which scores of his enslaved ancestors leapt off ships to their deaths 300 years before, he unremembers the fact that this country, for the most part, has never loved him, that its motto, out of many one people, seems astonishingly not ever, not even after his death, to include him. Annihilation, he knows it exists there. This Jamaica, the same one that venomously calls some of its male citizens faggots or battymen, and calls some of its female and male citizens sodomites, Jamaica that would just as soon slice open faggots' throats as see them, see me, see us, hanged from someone's mango tree. It should come as no surprise that somewhere on a day not so different from this one, some lesbian bitch, as one has sometimes heard those people referred to in Jamaica, or a woman perceived to be a lesbian, is raped and perhaps murdered, maybe eviscerated. Yes, for that is what she deserves, isn't it? Because a woman should be a woman, goddammit, and not aim to be like a Ross-clot man, for true? She, the bitch, should know her damn blasted place, not true? Know her place, even though some of us say that we are not in Jamaica like South Africa. We do not have corrective rape here. We are not ignorant and dirty like those whom some of us would consider disgusting black Africans, even though many of us, if not most of us, are also black. And lesbian bitches and faggots in Jamaica should know their place, because this kind of carrying on, this faggotness and lesbianness and simple filthy perversion is pure wickedness, nastiness, filthiness. It is an abomination, so it has been said. It is a sickness, a white people thing, a satanic thing, a thing we cannot bear in this here country. Master God, so annihilate the Batman them, the Sodomite them. So many have thought and on occasion shouted, yes, by Jesus, his son on the cross, it must be done. And if at least some of the nasty people are annihilated or exorcised or both, and if enough eyes and backs are turned away, when the police or others torture them, people will dance and cheer and sing in the streets, won't they? Many people will, won't they? Yes, of course. For isn't that what some people did when, not so many years ago now, one of Jamaica's most famous faggots and one who helped to found that nasty organization, the Jamaica Forum for Lesbians, All Sexuals, and Gays, J-Flag, was killed. Brian Williamson chopped up with a machete. Someone chopped him. Carved up with an ice pick. Someone carved him. Brian, remember him? His insides were ripped open by metal gripped in a pair of angry hands. Upon announcement of his death that June morning, people who happened to be out on the road where he lived began dancing. Dancing in that narrow road, dancing for joy, outside Brian's home as his still warm corpse was carried out of his house by those whose work it is to do such things. And many people who were watching on that lovely day, not unlike this one, danced and even sang the song, that so infamous song, the Annihilation Anthem by Buju Banton. Boom, bye, bye, and a batty boy head. Rude boy not promote the nasty man, the maffy dead. Kill homosexuals, yes, they must be killed, because that is what we deserve. Many in Jamaica still believe, because that is what faggots are. Many people in Jamaica and throughout the world still believe. Sodomites, lesbian bitches, unpersons, not people, things. Thank you.
You see what I mean about courage and power? That was extraordinary. Thank you very much. We're going to talk about not just what you've read, but the entire book in just a moment. Shyam, I wonder if you now read from your fourth novel, The Hungry Ghost, which is a novel that's not just about the relationship between a very traditional grandmother and a grandson in Sri Lanka, but it's also about the grandson trying to come to terms with his own sexuality, which he does eventually, but also with what it means to live in a country that is politically challenging that sexuality, socially challenging that sexuality, but also doing a lot of other things which make it very difficult for him to stay.
I should have gone first. It's very hard to follow that.
It's just different.
It's a first-person narrative, so I'm just telling you that. To truly imagine freedom, one must understand how one might escape. My understanding occurred when I was 17. By then, out of sheer loneliness, I had become an even more voracious reader and was the favored client of a bookman who turned up at our gate once a week, an old wooden tea chest filled with books roped to the rear carrier of his bicycle. He would spread a pink tarp on the veranda floor, then lay out his recent findings, each sun-bleached, monsoon-curled tome handled as if it was the finest glass, that raw rice odor of pages in the tropics rising up to me as I knelt on the other side of the tarp. I chose what I wanted, then gave back the volumes I had bought the last time. He credited me a certain amount for these returns, and I paid the difference. I devoured practically everything. Georgette Heyer, Victoria Holt, Dickens, Thackeray, Austen, Agatha Christie, Leon Uris, Tolstoy were all swallowed in great gulps. I also favor the biographies of old Hollywood stars whose movies I would never see, there being no market for them in Sri Lanka. I read about the torrid sex lives, the ghastly childhoods, the ruinous marriages, the alcoholism, the drug abuse, the sheer madness of the likes of Joan Crawford, Vivian Leigh, Judy Garland, and Jean Harlow, as if they were spicy pot boilers. Then one day, I chose the biography of Montgomery Clift, moved without fully realizing it by the star's beauty on the cover. Over the next few days, I read with growing wonder about his love of men, read about where such desire led, the soliciting of sex in dark streets and the back rooms of seedy bars, his body pawed over by rough sailors. The star despaired over his homosexuality, a word I had not encountered before, and became addicted to alcohol and pills, finally crashing his car into a telephone pole and ruining his once famous beauty. In the last photograph taken before he died of a heart attack, Clift, at 46, looked shriveled and haunted. I was repelled by the actor's life. Yet this aversion was surmounted by a momentous discovery that I too was homosexual. And with this realization, vague sexual desires, dreams, and furtive masturbation coalesced around that word. The sheer surge of my suppressed adolescent lust swept away shame or guilt or fear, along with the warning revealed by the biography that my life would be miserable. At school now, I allowed myself to contemplate how beautiful boys' necks were when they were thrown back in a laugh, the aching, vulnerable knot of their Adam's apple, the way beads of sweat trembled in the indentation between their nose and lips, the way thin white cotton trousers pulled tight across thighs when they sat. That easy contact with them caused a constant spilling over of warmth within me, the brushing against a classmate's hip when entering a class, the boy with whom I shared a textbook unconsciously pressing his leg against mine, his heady smell of sweat and Lifebuoy soap. Most of the boys in my school were wealthy and would be going abroad for higher education. Most of them had chosen America. During the interval, they talked constantly about America, how America, besides offering a superior education, was the mecca for sexual adventure, the place where women were for the picking. The idea of sexual freedom began to take root in me too. If America offered such an opportunity for sex with women, did it not offer similar opportunity for people like me? I was provided by the answer in that random way one finds answers in my dentist's waiting room, where I read a Time magazine article on the gay movement in San Francisco and New York. I smuggled the magazine home and hid it under my mattress, taking it out many nights to read the article again and study the photograph of men holding hands and kissing right there in the street. I became a member of the American Center Library, housed in a mansion on Flower Road. The library's ground floor contained a room largely devoted to periodicals and prospectuses for American universities. As I looked through the prospectuses, I would pause at the pictures of students lying in the grass, sun glinting in their hair, or hunched around a cafeteria table in earnest talk, or walking arm in arm down a corridor. I would gaze particularly at the men. Once in America, I told myself, I would become the person I really knew myself to be. In America, I would be popular, I would be gregarious, I would be witty, I would be handsome. In America, the sun would glint in my hair as I lay on manicured university lawns or strode across campuses with my new friends, and I would never return to Sri Lanka. The glistening blonde wood of the library floor, the faintly chlorinated smell of air conditioning, always a smell of privilege in the tropics, confirmed this promise.
Thank you very much indeed, Shyam. I said in my introductory remarks that this was a book launch, and at a traditional book launch, one hears readings from the writers, which is what we've done. But I also wanted for that to happen in order for people to get a glimpse of the creative energy that comes out of exploring one's identity. So I want to start really by asking all three of you how much being artists, being writers, being creative people is important to you in the context of who you are sexually. Why does it matter? What is the connection between those two things? Because that's part of what we're here to talk about. Thomas.
Well, I think that really and truly it begins with language, right? Because if you don't have a language that you can even name yourself in, and a language within which you can articulate your innermost feelings, amongst which are the most, I think, perhaps essential, love, desire, right, etc. If you can't even use language to name yourself and find a way to explore that interior life, then already you're dealing with a kind of schizoid, if you'll pardon the term, right, consciousness, fractured consciousness, because language is compromised and threatened. Yeah? So I think that just in the very elemental sense of trying to explore the unnameable and the unnamed, the silenced and the silent, that in itself, if you're writing, I think at least speaking for myself, how can a writer deal with language that is not supposed to exist, right? And yet, how can we not deal with language that is not supposed to exist? Because that's what I think many of us try to do when we're writing, is bring into being a language that can exist that didn't previously exist.
Sky Chirape, you are a forensic psychologist in training, but you're also a visual artist who actively uses your art to raise awareness about political, social, and human rights issues. Tell me a little bit about why it matters to you to be overt in the images that you use, or perhaps not. Perhaps it's just about being creative, which informs the way in which you can talk about issues that people often find very difficult to address.
Yeah, I think the way that Tom just put it, I think sometimes when you don't have a language to express who you are and to express your identity, you sort of have to create a space in which that you can reconstruct who you are, and express that. And I think for me, I find that I do that using art, but I find that art, which is sort of like a theme of what I'm interrogating at the moment with the exhibition that I'm co-curating with my friend. I find that art, is in my bones, because I come from, a people that have been quite expressive, whereas they might not have verbal language, if you like, maybe to express certain things, like say, for example, sexuality or gender identity or gender roles, but they might do it in a particular way, maybe using a dance, for example, or maybe using a story, a form of storytelling, or painting or a carving, and that would be a way of expressing, the way that we live on a daily basis. So I find that I have adopted the same, which is pretty much, I think that for me, art has been something that has been passed on from my ancestors, but I'm not just using it to raise awareness of things that are important to me, because I think I've been finding it very difficult, to be overt in a verbal manner about my sexuality and my identity, but it seems that it's a bit non-threatening, I guess, if you like. When I use art, I can use that form of expression to actually have a conversation, with my grandmother or with people from my country. It's really ironic, because on my way here on the tube, I met a couple of guys on the tube, and they said, "We know you, we read your article." And I think for me, that's pretty much why I use art, whether it's in the form of the word or whether it's form of photography, is to make people, create the conflict within themselves and interrogate themselves, but also create a space where we can have a discourse, about the things that matter to us, either as women or, in terms of, whether it's about gender identity, or displacement and so forth.
Shaim, is that something that resonates with you, this idea of creating a space? Because when I read your novel, it struck me so profoundly that this was a book that felt very hard won. This is your fourth novel, and I have no idea to what extent some of it might be autobiographical, but the voice of the first person narrator, the young man that we heard you speak, read from there, it just felt like this was a book that had been excavated out of something that was absolutely your experience?
Well, I always say that I'd say I'm an autobiographical writer. I quite freely admit to that. But it's an autobiography of time and place and period detail and feeling, but it's not an autobiography of plot and character. So I don't have a grandmother quite like that. And I don't.
Thank goodness for that.
Yeah. I had a very strong grandmother, but she was a different type of woman. So yes, it does have that element of sort of. I think it's trying to say I exist in some way, but especially in terms of the sexuality. But you have to understand. I mean, my first novel, Funny Boy, came out 20 years ago, and then coming out was thrust upon me at that moment. So I was like the first person in Sri Lanka to ever come out in the press. And it's not something I wanted to do, and I'd rather not have done it, but it was thrust upon me by the book. And since the protagonist was gay, I thought it was kind of a bit arch and silly to pretend to be even bisexual, I thought it's just ridiculous. I mean,
Did you think that might deflect some of the attention?
Yes, I thought even if I said I was bi, then at least, they'd say, well, he'd get over it and, he'll marry and whatever and move on. But I thought that's so ridiculous. Even if I was bisexual, I wouldn't have said it. I would have said I was gay because, at that time it was a political statement. So, so I've been doing it for some years. I've been schlepping around the gay thing for some time. But I don't actually think of myself as a gay writer because, the identity that's really thrust on me in Sri Lanka is the identity of having a Tamil last name. So that is much more visceral. The danger of it is much more real than anything else. And the bewilderment and the hurt and the anger and the pain and all that around this odd thing of having this Tamil last name. So it becomes more urgent in a way than.
Well, let's since you've now, it's a perfect segue into talking about the politics of what it is that, all of this that you've just said so far, all three of you, this is all personal. But as we know, the personal is very, very often political and vice versa. So I want to, I'll come back to you, Shyam, in just a moment, since you're the one that brought it up. But Thomas, in your book of essays, you are quite conscious about wanting to confront politicians. In fact, there is an open letter to the Prime Minister of Jamaica in your book in which you argue very, very vociferously and very strongly for a change in the political climate and the cultural climate that can only come from the top. And I wonder if you can just say a little bit about why that leadership is so important in order for things to filter down and accrete culturally.
Well, when I wrote that piece, I was in Jamaica, and the Prime Minister at that time, Bruce Golding, had just made the statement, right, to BBC, in fact, that he would never have any LGBT people in his cabinet. And I didn't feel, because I was in Jamaica launching a LGBT Caribbean anthology, and I didn't feel that I could be in Jamaica doing that at a book festival with all that I'd already done and the fact that people had been killed, right? People, including friends of mine in the organization, J-Flag, et cetera, and killed brutally. I couldn't be in Jamaica in all good consciousness and conscience and not say something. And of course, that was a very irresponsible thing for the Prime Minister to say. And if you're leading a country like Jamaica into the future, into the 21st century, or in the 21st century, why are we clinging to actually colonial laws from Britain, right? And on the one hand, that legislate against homosexuality, Buggery Law, Gross Indecency Act, etc. Why are we clinging to that colonial legacy as we cling to the Queen as the head of state, right? And at the same time, not taking forward steps for ourselves, identifying new ways of looking at ourselves. And Bruce Golding was clearly, it was a lazy moment, I think, in his political career, and a deeply irresponsible one, which could cause people to be killed yet again. And when you're actually dealing, I think, with, I'm not sure if I'm answering your question precisely, but dealing with the visceral fact of people being murdered nearby you, right, and being found in various places, their various body parts, that brings home to you the important political import, the political import of this matter. But indeed, in a country like Jamaica, once again, in which the Prime Minister is respected, notwithstanding the reality of shadow governments like Dons and so on, Don culture, for him to be forward-thinking would change things dramatically, as has happened to some degree with the incumbent Prime Minister, Portia Simpson Miller, who I think very much taking lead, not from him, but from other people, and being a politically sage person, decided to say that she would consider having LGBT people in her cabinet. But she's also a woman, and I think for a woman to say that, first woman Prime Minister, right? But for a woman to say that in Jamaica at this time as a government minister, I think is perhaps a little bit less dangerous, if you will, right? Even though there have been rumors about her sexuality as well. So, yeah, right? I'm just saying there are rumors. I'm not saying, you know.
That's okay. That's all you needed to say.
Right.
So everyone's going to be Googling away. Just while we're... so while I'm talking about the internet and Googling, can I just... Since all of you seem to have phones in your hands, if you want to tweet about this, it's at CW Writers, and the hashtag is CWConvo. I want to talk, Sky, about this responsibility that all three of you have clearly taken individually in your own political, social context to speak out. How important is that responsibility, and how much does it become a burden?
I think it is very important. I think I do feel responsible, for how I live my life. I feel responsible for how other people around me are treated. In the same way that I do believe that human rights are universal, and therefore because of that, I want and wish for my own rights to be as equal as the next person, and therefore I do feel responsible that I have to raise awareness of all these things. So even though I'm in the UK, where I could perhaps, if you like, say maybe live a quiet life, be safe, if you like to, describe it that way, I still feel very responsible, of other people around me, people that are left in Zimbabwe, people that are on the African continent, people that are in the UK. I think that's really inspired. I think I draw that from, I keep on going on and battering on about this Ubuntu philosophy, which originates from, in the part of the southern of Africa, which says, I am well if you are well. And therefore I think that's really, for me, that's what it really resonates with me. So I feel that I cannot be well if the next person is not well. So regardless of whether they're on the continent of Africa, or they're in Sri Lanka, or they're in India, I do feel that as long as there are going to be oppression in the world, that as long as there are going to be people living in poverty, or as long as there are going to be not having equal rights or whatever have you, then therefore we cannot stop raising awareness or fighting for the things that we believe in. Sometimes it does feel like a burden, I might say so. And I think for me it's very challenging, because my job, my day-to-day job, which is a 9-to-5 job, Monday to Friday, is very challenging, working for the prison service, which sometimes can become a conflict of interest as well because of what I do. Working with prisoners, working in psychology is very mentally draining. So sometimes I sort of like have to come home and think, do I really want to be doing this? But I think that philosophy of Ubuntu continues to drive me, in those moments when I do feel that maybe I can just leave it aside. So I do feel that I cannot exist, or coexist just alongside psychology or just activism. I have to continue doing what I do,
Shaim, this novel has been published in Sri Lanka. Mm-hmm. You go back to Sri Lanka. Tell us a little bit about the extent to which there was discomfort in being forced to come out when Funny Boy was first published, because the culture in Sri Lanka, which you explore very beautifully in this novel, is there are laws, but then there is the culture. So those two things sit side by side, and they intersect, and one is informed by the other, obviously, because there is a law on the statute books, which we'll talk about in a minute. But I want to ask you a little bit about what that felt like, to feel that you then had to be this person that spoke for being gay and being Sri Lankan and being Tamil.
Well, I don't know, Razia. It's a good question. I mean, I'm not a very brave person, so I think sometimes I just hold my, like, jumping off the diving board, I just jumped. I just thought that it's just to be done. and I did it.
Why do you
and
say you're not a brave person?
But because I know lots of very brave people in Sri Lanka. Trust me, I'm not very brave compared to them. But I just, it had to be done, and I was the person. Okay, here's the thing. I'm a very privileged person. Okay, I've had a very privileged life on many, many levels, and I guess I firmly have believed for a long time that with great privilege comes great responsibility. And so then I feel like you have to do it. I mean, I don't really think that you have a choice if you have privilege, like I have privilege, that you got to stand up and speak. And I just did it. And I just took my chance and did it. But it was also 1994, you know, and that Chandrika's government was in, and it was a time of when everything was possible, you know, like there was just a...
So for those who don't know, 1994, Chandrika Kumaratunga came to power after 17 years of a government, which was the UNP government was in power, and she came to power, and it was felt at the time as though Sri Lanka was going to be, it was a hopeful time, and that was when I was in Sri Lanka. I lived there for 2 years, and then everything collapsed in terms of the ceasefire between the government and the Tamils, and it went back to how it was before.
Yes, but in that time it felt very everything was possible, and you know, to be fair with, I mean, I'm not going to defend Chandrika here, but I mean, I think that she continued on various levels to be progressive despite what happened, but she inherited an awful situation, and it's interesting that she exists in the book as a kind of extended metaphor. I wondered what she thought about it. I didn't dare ask her myself how she felt about being an extended metaphor in the book. But, you know, she does exist. And so of somebody who inherits this horrible situation that she has to somehow deal with. So.
Let me ask all of you to address this very directly. This idea of being silenced in the countries of your origin, but limited by a label when you are not in your country of origin. Which is the better place to be? And it's a stark, completely, on one level, asinine question for me to ask, but I also think it must be quite a real one, that you make a choice about leaving your country of origin because it's too difficult to be the person that you are, and you go to, in your case, New York, although you are teaching at Birmingham University, in Warwick University currently, and in your case, you from Zimbabwe to London, and in your case from Colombo to Canada, that there is this sense that you are immediately, for whatever reason, publishing notions, the way in which the arts work in the countries that you choose to live in, that you are labelled and therefore marginalised in the countries that you choose to live in. Is there a tension for you all the time as creative people that the choices that you make are compromises? Thomas.
I don't think that's really my priority, though. I wouldn't think about that very much because I have no control over that, for one thing. And as they say in Jamaica, me don't business, right? It's just like basically like people are going to, we can't control what people think about us. It's difficult enough to form sentences and paragraphs just doing the writing and trying to leave myself because I want to recede and have the work be forefront, the characters, etc., whatever it is that I'm doing, whether it's fiction or nonfiction. And I can't get into all that stuff, right? I think that, but those realities come up, of course, all the time, right? I don't know. I mean, I think, I just ask myself, in terms of this question, you said what's better to be in a place where you're silenced. There are times when I would really like to be in Jamaica for much longer periods and really be there. I'm glad that Shia mentioned privilege because I also come from a very privileged background in Jamaica, and the fact that I have a US passport already gives me a great deal of privilege, right? Which is why I was able to speak out against the Prime Minister in Jamaica that day because I could leave the next day. I didn't have to get a visa, right? And so on. And I was not working in a struggling situation where I was vulnerable. I think that while I would like to be in Jamaica for longer periods, I also realized that I would be living in a very privileged milieu that I also find objectionable in some ways, because a lot of the upper middle class and the middle class in Jamaica that I know, that I experienced, is very stultifying and dull and not particularly imaginative and conservative, right? And mired in religion and in pro-American and pro-British nonsense. And so it's not interesting, really, although on some levels it is. So I wouldn't want to be there for that reason necessarily either. So I think it's good for maybe for a writer, at least for myself, to be between this, if you will, rock and hard place, because I don't necessarily want to be comfortable anywhere, although we all yearn for comfort.
But I suppose really the thing that informed the question was to do with the extent to which, if you are a creative person, how much do you then channel that creativity into activism?
I think probably just going back in terms of where is it better, I think I would probably throw back a question, is there anywhere in the world where it's safe? For women, where it's safe for gay people, where it's safe for lesbians, where it's safe particularly for transgender, intersex people. That's really arguable. I guess for me, I've got a very strong sense of identity as an African, because I grew up in Zimbabwe, was brought up, bred, in Zimbabwe, and Zimbabwe is very much in me. So I walk around with that. Yet again, I also grew up in a society where, as a female, rather than because of my sexuality, really, because there was no language or verbal or visibility, around sexuality, but as a female, I was very silent in terms of, because of having to experience all these gender roles and conform. And then I live in the UK, where I work in a very white middle class environment, and then where, of course, I look very visibly very African and unapologetically as well. And I have to navigate myself in this world where I have to, have things around class being imposed on me, race, immigration, which I've been detained for 48 hours in the UK. I have experienced homophobia, racism, discrimination, sexism. So, and in terms of where is it better, I think it's a case of, I think as a human, well, as an activist, as a creativist, I think you grow up to be comfortable with the uncomfortable, in a way. For me, it becomes part of you, living with this sort of like controversial sort of word. So you find a way of having to navigate, around that world and yourself. And I think I could live anywhere, and I could probably call anywhere home, in a way, because I carry home with me, and I think I do carry my ancestors with me. So yeah, I think that's probably...
You're nodding away, Shyam. Is that
no,
something?
I just wanted to answer the question, because I think sometimes, one has to sort of provide a sort of a true view of how it is. I don't feel silenced at all in Sri Lanka. I feel like I'm a much loved writer there, and my books are taught in the university, and Funny Boy is part of the core curriculum of the English literature, in terms of if you're studying English literature. So, and I go to the universities to talk to the students, and I've seen, it's been 20 years since Funny Boy, I see generation after generation of students who love the book and identify with the book and feel moved and sort of enlarged by the book. So, and it is very much so, and the book is now translated into Sinhalese as well. So I don't feel that at all. I really don't feel that. I've even got some sort of honor from the government that can only go to 25 living artists, someone else has to die now for somebody else to be inducted. So in that sense, I don't really feel silenced at all. I feel like, I feel very Sri Lankan. I feel like I'm embraced by the country, and I embrace the country as well, despite all the contradictions. In the Canadian context, the way I say it is that I'm taught it at York University. I'm taught at various universities, and I know at York University I'm taught in a course on queer literature, on Canadian literature, on children's literature, and on immigrant literature. So I feel, in some sense, that Canada also sort of seems to embrace my multiple identities and embraces me. After all, they've provided the booze tonight, so I presume it's because of me. But so
whether it is or not, we're grateful.
so I do.
I wonder whether, you know, you've all actively been willing to take part in an event that's called a Commonwealth Writers Conversation. So let's, just before I open it up to the floor and ask for questions, just have a little chat about the context, the legal context, because the laws that are in place, Lucy mentioned the statistic, 53 member nations of the Commonwealth, 41 of them continue to criminalise consensual same-sex activities between adults. I'm going to say it again, 41 out of 53. It's stark, it's shocking, and it makes real impact on individual people's lives. So when you chose to be a part of this conversation that's to do with the Commonwealth, I wonder if each of you can say a little bit about the legal side of it, because it impacts on what informs your work, Thomas, hugely. You're willing to confront the politics head on. Shyam, in the same way as you are, you may be completely embraced by both Canada and Sri Lanka. That's not to say that there aren't huge issues in Sri Lanka culturally, as well as in terms of the judiciary, that's to do with being free to be an LGBT person. And similarly, not just in Zimbabwe, but many African countries where there are now laws that make it more and more and more difficult. The most recent case that we've seen has been Uganda, Nigeria, and it comes up again and again, countries on the African continent where it's incredibly difficult to feel that you are an equal citizen if you are gay. So I want you to say just a little bit about what impact that makes on you, the choice that you have made to be a part of this conversation. Sean.
Oh, I thought you were going to start there.
No, I just thought I'd vary it a little.
I was sort of nodding off it. I'm just kidding. Why do I want to be part of the? Yes, there is this law in Sri Lanka, the sodomy law, and it is terrible. And on a day-to-day basis, people, I think, are sort of more live and let live than, say, in Uganda, for sure, or in Jamaica. I don't think that the level of homophobia in general on the street level is as high as these places. But the law is there. And so you kind of, I certainly feel like I do live in Sri Lanka with this sword hanging above my neck. And I've seen it fall for other people, and when it falls spectacularly. So that's there. I mean, you know, it's just there. And you don't have any rights is basically the problem. You don't have any rights. And of course, like in all these situations, the poorer you are, the more you feel these things. And the more rich you are, the more you're sort of exempt from it. And so, you know, I mean, it is terrible, I mean, for those people who are arrested in these sort of cruising areas, and then their life can be just shattered. It's just, yeah, I mean, I could go on and on about it, but it's really kind of awful for them.
Sky, in the last 6 months or so, I've done interviews with ministers from the government in Uganda specifically about this issue. And what's struck me the most is that my job as a journalist is always to put forward, well, so really, you know, we're talking about equality here. No, we're not. We're talking about culture. And so I suppose my question to you is that the tension between the notion of this isn't the sort of society that we want, this is imposed. And that's something that came up in the piece, the extract that you read, that this is a white thing. Can you say a little bit about the challenges that are inherent in trying to challenge culture, especially when what comes back at you is this is neo-colonial?
Yes, I think probably in terms of, I mean, if you look at South Africa, which is a really good example where they've got, you know, where they've had for a long time, since the 90s, you know, one of the best constitutions in terms of, you know, celebrating equality, but that did not really sit right, you know, with the local traditions and the cultures, and therefore people continued to be treated inhumanely, you know, via corrective rape and things like that. So sometimes I think in a lot of African countries, you do find that sometimes the culture and in the traditions, particularly in South Africa, so even if you do introduce a law, it's still perceived as very much, a product, of the British or a product of the Western sort of like ideology. And I think particularly in Uganda at the moment, the thing that's coming out is that homosexuality is a Western disease, it's a white man's disease, and that colonialists introduced homosexuality, but which is something that I've been quite interested in, actually, in sort of like trying to use art to make people a bit more aware that actually before colonialism, there's been in existence, history and examples of same-sex experiences. They might not have been called gay or trans or queer, but they were very much in existence before colonialism. And I think it's just a matter of trying to make people a bit more aware, maybe, using art as a language. Certainly in Uganda, having the law has made it much more, incredibly hard for people to navigate, the country and sort of into accessing healthcare, accessing housing. A lot of people have had to be removed from the houses by landlords because, of course, the law also not just affects gay people, but it also affects their families, their neighbors, the people they rent houses, the people they work for. So it's, I think, the law sort of like gives people more, I guess, a right to, impose more justice, if you like. So I think it's been incredibly difficult, which is for me personally, one of the fears that I live with, because now it's just happening in Uganda, it's happening in Nigeria, and there's been rumors of it may be spreading Kenya, and soon it could be Zimbabwe. I'm aware that Zimbabwe has distanced itself from the Commonwealth. So it's very difficult.
Hold the thought. So let's open it up to the public. Thomas, you probably have got some things to say about this.
I did want to say just really that it's very important for me, at least, to remember, right, that we cannot separate LGBT discrimination from discrimination against women. And in Jamaica particularly, until we deal with violence against women and hatred of women, right, embedded in the society, that is also very much a part of our slave history, all of this stuff, right, and colonialism, we're not going to be able to deal with homosexuality, because we have to ask ourselves this question, right? Why is it seen as so atrocious that a man might wish to be in some way like a woman, right? Why is a woman seen as the most despicable thing to be? And why is it seen as, I don't know, brooking the gods or something like that if a woman decides to be mannish, right? So gender binaries, right, gender absolutes have to be challenged. Yeah. I think in Jamaica, in some ways, finally, just to say lastly, that the laws are almost incidental in some ways. They are very important, mind you, they are, absolutely. But the cultural differences, the cultural clinging to religion, and especially to fundamentalist Christianity, because Jamaica is mostly a Christian country. It's not like Trinidad where you have, right, more. It's difficult to get away from that. And those religions are, to use that old word, patriarchal, right? So until we, if someone says, you go on like woman or something, meaning to a man, that's an insult, right? You're acting like a woman. Well, so what, right? So what? And also, I just want to say, I'll just add this really quickly. The loathing with which anal penetration between men is greeted in Jamaica has everything to do also with the gender binary, right? And that the batty is not made for that and so on, that should go into a vagina and so on. So the woman is always supposed to be sexually subordinated, yeah? Well, that's a problem.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jide Macaulay. I'm from Nigeria. This question is to the panelists. In your books and art, did any of the characters experience religious prejudice on the grounds of sexual orientation or gender identity? If so, how did you address it?
Anyone in particular want to take that?
No, my books, they don't, it's not religious at all. It's not religion at all, that's the problem.
I think with the exhibition that I'm currently curating, we've got an artist who sort of like, has interrogated the influence that religion has on sexual identity. And her work, which is one of the paintings which is outside, has actually been so inspired by so the American evangelicals, I think, as well as some of the stories that have been in the media about the pastors that have been sleeping with men, if you like, but then still going out and being quite incredibly homophobic within societies. So I think she's sort of like I think she might be around somewhere, so she might be able to say more about her work. But she certainly, I think it's called Milk the King. Where she's so depicted in painting, this pastor who's been probably using his penis, if you like, in a church, in terms of like saying, this is a present from God, but then at the same time, it's sort of like being very homophobic in the society and imposing homophobia and encouraging people to be inhumanely treating LGBTIs and stuff.
Jonathan Cooper, just sitting in the front row from Human Dignity Trust. I wonder if you can just, it's moot, I think, just to mention at this point that it was only, not really that long ago that the statute books that we're talking about that exist in all these other countries was in place in this country as recently as 1967. And I wonder if you can just say a little bit about the legal framework under which all of this exists and what shifted it here.
Well, I mean, interestingly, there may have been partial decriminalisation in 1967, but we only had victim-centred, gender-neutral criminal laws governing the sexual offences in 2003. So it was that recently that we've had an effective, fit-for-purpose criminal justice system that actually properly protects people from sexual offences as recently as 2003. The extraordinary thing about this country that as recently as at the end of the 1950s, there were up to 1,000 gay men in prison at any one time for having engaged in consensual sexual activity with another man who was, again, consenting to engage in sexual activity with him. And so it was an extraordinary place, the United Kingdom. I thought, Shyam, your analogy of the sword just sort of hanging over people's heads was a brilliant metaphor, and it absolutely encapsulates what the reality of criminalisation means. But how did we go from 1,000 gay men at any one time being in prison in this country, literally 50 years, 60 years ago, to the situation we find ourselves in now, which is full equality? And in a way, nobody's really arguing for full equality at the moment, and certainly in the context of the jurisdictions that our amazing speakers come from. We're talking about ending persecution. I mean, and that's what the criminal law does. It persecutes people. But so how did that happen in this country? Well, law played a role, legislators played a role, lawyers played a role. Obviously, the criminalisation of sexuality in this context is a violation of international human rights law and domestic constitutions. Everything that's happening to you in your jurisdictions is a violation of your constitutions. But the real change, which is why this evening's event is so important, the real change came through culture. And you saw these films, television, books, the kind of discussions that your books, Shyam, your books, Tom, your art, is the real engine for change. And so when you're looking at the extraordinary things that are going on in Nigeria and Uganda, where on top of existing criminalisation, they're enhancing criminalisation, what we need to be asking ourselves is how do we, across the Commonwealth, generate a kind of cultural movement that makes gay people unremarkable? Because every LGBTI person just wants to be unremarkable, and which is an extraordinary quest to have, just to be unremarkable. But what we need to try and nurture and culture, which is why it's so brilliant that the Foundation and Lucy are doing this work, is to try and bring the cultural change that actually just shows how unremarkable we all are.
Thank you very much. Well, no, we are fabulous, right? I'm certain that there are people who've got other questions, but I'm being told that we kind of need to wrap up here. But please do join all of us and have a drink and carry on talking. It only remains for me to say thank you to Lucy and the Commonwealth Writers for organising this, and especially to all three of you. Put your hands together, everyone. Thank you so much.